And we should be live now. This is my guest, Dave. Dave from the next state up. And my name is Bill. And this is the 999 show. And we're going to be talking a little bit about next state up. And my name is Bill. And this is the 999 show. And we're going to be talking a little bit about next state up. And I didn't know I had the volume on that on my other device. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the way things were, and Dave has a really interesting story here. And so, what's the basis of this is I watched this podcast with Keanu Reeves. You know, the guy who played Bill and Ted and Bill and Ted's X, and he was also Neo and everything else. And he talked about, welcome, Chloe. He talked about that we, in our generation now, that there is a need to talk about what our lives were like before the internet became so widespread and before the cell phone whipped around the world and before social media. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And so in part of that, we will maybe talking about what of the political landscape that there was before, like 9/11, and not naming any names, but if that enters into the equation, it enters into the equation. And so, because Dave here, I went to college with Dave, and we went to Linfield College in McMinnville, Oregon, and we were in the same fraternity together. And I'll just kind of remember, if I remember right, how I met Dave. And I was this guy, Sean, I'm not going to mention his last name, and he thought that I would be a good addition to the Delta House. And when I saw the Delta House, the way I kind of thought about it was Revenge of the Nerds, because the Deltas had the highest GPA on the campus. And it wasn't like a jock house. No, but you know what? There were people who played in the school sports and so forth. And so when he brought me over the Delta House for the first time, it was Dave's room that we visited. And I remember that it was your, and so you were like, that's what I remember, is that you were one of the first persons that I met there in the house, and we kind of course, I was a shy guy at that time, and as I was saying backstage, that I have it's called audio processing disorder, and if you were in this day and age, they would fold that right into the autistic spectrum disorder thing or whatever, and so what that meant was that when I was born, it was like my brain was deaf, and so my brain had to be taught how to hear. Mm-hmm. And so I was like 3 or 4 years old when I started talking, and so everything was delayed by a couple of years. And so when I met Dave, I was 20 years old, and we were exactly the same age, but he was 2 years. So he graduated from high school. When he graduated, and then he went to Linfield, and I was delayed 2 years after that. And so my freshman year was his junior year.
Sophomore? Or junior freshman?
Yeah. But I had gone to a community college to go do a bunch of remedial catch-up work first. So I was redoing more academic work to be ready to come into a 4-year college. And so it took that time. And then once I was at Linfield, it took more time. So to get that bachelor's degree, it took me 6.5 years over a course of 8 years. Because there was a point of time in there where I had to take time away because I had exhausted myself so much. And that was really right around the time of Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And that's when I took time off at that time. And then I came back in, and then I ended up, because I started in Linfield as a physics major.
I remember
because my dad. 999 show, and we're gonna be what is going on here? I got to put that someplace else. And hopefully it doesn't pop on again. And anyways, I started in doing that. And then when I came back to, hold on a second here. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the way things were.
Pause it. Technical difficulty.
I'm trying to. Interesting story here. And so, like, what's the basis of this? I know it's never done that before to me. Anyways, it's weird. That's the damn thing about live entertainment, is that things weird like this happen. Well, anyway, so
me, tech wise, look at you in your own studio. I mean, I've got a piano room or a keyboard room that I play in, but that's a completely different setup. You've got like cameras and lights. I have cameras and lights, and I'm working off of my craft table because I also paint. Oh, and yeah. Welcome, Patchy. And so then when I came back into Linfield, I went back in. I kind of abandoned physics, and I just decided I was going to finish in mathematics, but I also picked up religious studies. Oh yeah, because I took one of those classes and I ended up getting like A's in it, and so wow, so it's really kind of cool to get higher grades, and so I kind of shifted focus, and then we had our other classmate, the other Dave guy, Pyro Dave, who was a mathematician and he had that a degree in religious studies, and then he went on to get a master's of divinity. And then they end up spending his whole life at Microsoft programming computers. And you know who I'm talking about, and I don't need to mention anymore. But anyway, so I met Dave at the Delta House, and he was like my first contact there. And Dave here was a journalist and a communications person, and he has a lot of experience in his life, and including running for office, where he and did you get elected into that office, or no? I you just okay. You did. You were then okay. Yeah, I mean, would you like to talk about that? Or yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, so. Long story short, graduate from Linfield. I'm 22 years old. I had a journalism background. I worked at several different newspapers for, until moving back home to Longview in the year 2000. And my ex-wife, Diane, and I, we decided we'd get home to be with family and get involved in politics. And, I'd been on the journalism side. I'd covered it. I thought, well, surely we can do better than this. We were young idealists. And so the first thing I did was, we were at the Cowlitz County Fair in September of 2000. And we walked by the Cowlitz County Democrat booth. And I always identified as a Democrat. And it was really interesting to me because the Cowlitz County Democrat was a fairly conservative party. Our congressional, our Congressman Brian Baird had just voted on a flag burning bill, passing a flag burning bill. And I thought, what? I'm a communications guy. Free speech was everything I was about. So, I just thought that was, weird and bizarre. Because I was a communications major, relatively articulate, the elders of the party sort of took a shine to me, and I started attending meetings and just kind of learning things. And by spring of the next year, in May is when you file to run for office. And a lady named Karen, the former mayor of Longview, the current mayor of Longview, was running against Dennis, the former mayor of Longview, and it was set up to be a battle royal. The two of them
She had he had applied for a vacant position on the council. She was the tie-breaking vote that kept him off the council, and so they were set up for a heated battle. And filing deadline was on Friday. And I had considered running for office at that time, and for a different position, but I put it aside because I just didn't think I was ready. Mm-hmm. And so on Friday of filing deadline, I was down at the YMCA playing basketball, and they had a noon ball game, and I was down there and playing, and Diane walks in. Diane never came to the YMCA. My first thought, holy shit, who died? And she said, Dave, I need to talk to you. That's alarming. So I went over, what's up? Karen just called. She's dropped out of the race, and they want you to run against Dennis. Oh. Seize the day.
So you did, huh?
And, I was 32 years old, and while I had flirted with the Democrats, I was also a Ralph Nader supporter. So I was
yeah.
Green guy.
I supported Nader.
All I was an idealist, 32 years old. And, and I, with who didn't want to compromise. And Dennis was old school Republican, very kind, he was a school teacher in the Longview public school system. And I always thought of him as out of touch, generation. And I didn't think he was, the man of the time, but the community thought differently. And I lost 58-42. And that was, and in the world of politics, pretty much anything 10 and over is I welcome to a politics moment. So that, that was frustrating, but we kept at it. And what Diane and I really believed at the time was that we wanted the Cowlitz County Democrats to reflect progressive ideals. And so ultimately, we became leaders in the party. I was the chairman of one group. She was the chair of another group, and the vice chair of the central committee. And we ended up having a lot more success organizing the party in a way that we saw fit, and ultimately getting two people elected, Axel S. and Chuck W. We don't do last names, right?
That's right. We're not doing last names.
Don't do last names. Axel S. and Chuck W. were elected in 2006 and 2007. Axel is county commissioner. Chuck is Longview City Council. With those two wins, those guys were 27 and 28 years old, and we took out 28 years of Republican rule with those guys. They beat incumbents who, between the two of them, had 28 years of incumbent experience. And so, yes, the revolution is here. Youth will be served. Gen X is on the clock. And today, I think that's probably my proudest political moment, was getting, playing a part in helping Axel S. and Chuck W. get elected. But one thing about Longview is that, we were solid. We were always a solid union town with solid union jobs, and that meant Democrat. And as time has gone on, those union jobs went away. Mills closed down. It's like a Springsteen song, right? They're closing down the textile mills, cross the railroad tracks. Foreman says those jobs are going, boy, and they ain't coming back. Billy Joel's song, Allentown. They're closing all down.
Well, this area that I grew up in was devastated by, it was timber, and it was completely devastated in the 80s, but it took like 16, 17 years for all of the small mills to go away, because my father owned a small lumber mill. Mm-hmm. And he was able to stay simply because he had everything paid for. He was in essentially using a cash accounting system. He wasn't relying on lines of credit and everything else. And so he had that. And so with that, you were able to stay in business way longer. But we had some really rough years, because I remember being like 15, 16 years of age. I think I was like 16. I just got my driver's license, and we had everybody in the family had to go out and get a job. We had to get a job. The mill wasn't running. It was in the summertime. My mom and my sister were working at a restaurant down the street, and me and my dad were working at a cannery on the other side of Salem, and that was the way it was. And so here I was, this stuff. I don't think it really happens today, but I was 16 years old working a graveyard shift job. And I think that there are rules against in our labor laws now that I don't think that even not even for summer jobs was a graveyard shift job allowed for kids under 18. But my dad and I we were doing that. And I think there was also some other people, but things were just really, really tough. And getting those experiences of like working early on, and how that kind of changes a person and so forth. And so you had, but I can remember with Longview when I lived up in Seattle, it was a Greyhound bus stop, and there were all these little tiny houses. Yeah. And I think that was like crew housing for those union people in Longview, Washington. Yeah. And
absolutely, that you're spot on. That's exactly how those towns were created for the workers. Those houses were created for the workers, and Longview is a planned city, and by that I mean our city circle has 8 spokes. If you drive around the city circle, there's 8 arterials that you can access that will take you to different parts of the town. The mill section, the business section, residential sections, the professional, section. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that area absolutely has always been working class / working poor. And it's today it's I mean, the Cowlitz County itself has definitely been, it went from a prosperous community to, one beset by a lot of challenges with all of those mill closures. And it's only, it's come back a little bit, I think. And we are in a rebuild mode, but
and then it would have kind of come back a little bit sooner if Spirit Mountain hadn't fought Cowlitz tribe so hard to put that casino in place, and for the Grand Ron, how much they tied him up in litigation for like 20 years or something close to that, because I mean, that being which is what that tribe has done with every casino that has gone in, into play around this areas, and fighting all of that stuff, any of those things. If they wanted to put a casino in Portland, they were there fighting. And I think there was a couple other tribes, they wanted to get together and put a casino in where the Shamawa Indian School is. And I don't think that Shamawa Indian School exists anymore, or if it does, it's like in that complex. And so Spirit Mountain they fought they fought that, and I think that's still tied up in litigation. And so they wanted it to be like have like 5 or 6 tribes that went together to go in on that casino, and then but that was not really, they didn't want that. And so, yeah, I can see that, because that's really what in this area, what the main industry is casino. And casino, I guess the lifespan of it is way longer than they expected.
Of casinos themselves?
Yeah, because I think they're like, statistically, I think that they thought that casino would have like a 20-year lifespan, but it's going on 30 or something like that.
Well, they've diversified into a lot of things too. I mean, there's a lot of entertainment.
Yeah. Hold on a second. I'm gonna just, somebody's calling for me. I do caregiving, and I'll be right back. So you can hang out, or you can talk a little bit.
Okay. Well, I guess to kill time for dead air, so first off, I'm thankful to Bill for allowing us to have this opportunity to converse and to talk about issues of the day. And Bill talked a little bit about his background as a young person, having to go to work early. I was in a bit of a different situation. My parents were 43 and 41 when I was born. And they'd been married for 22 years when I was born. Bill, I'm telling, so you were talking about your story of having to work, at 16 or whatever. I'm kind of telling my story of how I, came into the business community. And so, long story short, my parents died. My dad died when I was 20. My mom became incapacitated when I was 22, and they were in commercial real estate. They had operated taverns for the bulk of their working years. They owned 3 taverns at one point, and sold out those taverns, developed a commercial piece of property. And basically, we had 2 buildings that we leased 7 stores out of for a period of time. And at 22, I took those over because my mom was incapacitated. And so talked about having to grow up fast. And I did. At age 20, when my dad died, I was a junior in high school. And
junior in college.
Yeah. Or I'm sorry, junior in college. And junior at Linfield. And I'd gone through, I guess, a bit of a rebellious period, a bit of a disillusioned period in my life. And I wasn't really sure I was going to finish Linfield. And I was angry at injustices, perceived or created. I'm not sure which. But after my dad died, I became hyper-focused and, turned around from being a C student to being an AB student. And and finishing strong and getting into journalism. And, I was able to hire a property manager to manage the properties. My mom was in a position where she had access to 24-hour home health care. I mean, my parents did very well for themselves, for, 2 Depression era people, 27, 1925, 1927, going through World War II, and coming out on the other side and being able to, in a period where we were able to develop small businesses and where, small businesses were able to succeed. And, I was fortunate that they provided me a very good lifestyle, and really it was up to me to not screw it up. And
so then did they carry on with their Depression era of values their entire life then?
Absolutely.
And so then you must have inherited that with like your relationship with money and everything else. Because I know my dad, because my dad was born in 1940. My mom was born in 1940 and my dad was born in 38. And my dad had those immigrant, his parents were, his mom was an immigrant and his dad was a first generation American. And they had that relationship to money that was like really, really tight. And so when he was a business owner, of course, that was hence having everything paid off and running no lines of credit and having money. And then when he did do a line of credit, and I think when he bought into that business, he borrowed the money from his mom, and then he paid it off with this in a couple of years. And then his mom passed away in 1980. And then, and then his dad had passed away in 1972, I think it was. That's right. I was 4. And, that, and having, when you lose that, like a parent like that, it kind of just cuts that thing. And you're now you're on your own and you got to be your own person. And it doesn't really matter how old you are, because that you go through that process. If you're 20 years old, you go through that process. You go through that same process when you're like 40 years old or whatever, to being, because now you don't have that person to talk to get advice from.
Absolutely spot on. The greatest regret I have in my life is not having an adult relationship with my parents. I mean, that is, I think I did well. I didn't screw it up. I didn't party it away. In fact, at age 20, I mean, coming into something like that, a lot of kids, may have pissed it away, may have partied, whatever. Not me. I mean, I would tell you that I was more responsible from ages 20 to 35 than I was from ages 35 to 50.
Yeah, but people tend to, there's something that happens to people when they do hit their mid 30s, is that because you spend all this time trying to be an adult, and then when you hit something like 35 or so, there's a bit of a regression, and you think, well, I can just lay back and I can, enjoy myself and so forth. And so like I had kind of the same thing too. There was like some lady, because I was living up in Seattle at that time, and I think I went like 15 years without having any alcohol at all.
Good for you.
Except maybe like 3 drinks a year, because I had the story that where I had health insurance for the first time, and I was like 38, or it was 2006, however old I was in 2006. And I was talking with my doctor, and he's like, having that doctor interview thing, and says, and maybe this was like the second time I seen him. Oh yeah. Oh, I started drinking again. Yeah. And he's, oh, well, let's just, how much are you drinking? And I said 3. Is that like what, 3 drinks a day? 3 drinks a week? I said, no, that's 3 drinks a year. And then he takes the pen and he just throws it down and he says, God damn it, you're just wasting my time with these answers here. It's like, I don't want to hear nothing about 3 goddamn drinks a year. That's like 0. How am I supposed to, that's 0. But what I do remember is being. So I haven't had any alcohol now for 2 years, because I've been on metformin for 2 years, and because you're getting older, we get something. But what I miss most of all is the cognac, and I miss the tequila, but not the bottom shelf tequila. I miss that stuff that's like the $50 bottle stuff, and so that's one of the things when I'm talking about. I was thinking is when I was over that 35, or I was in at 40. It was like, okay, I'm going to have some alcohol, but I'm going to have something that tastes good. And I'm going to have something that, I think the most bottom shelf thing I ever bought was the famous Grouse, which is, that blended Scotch whiskey. And it was like $18, $20 a bottle or something like that. And so that was like, that to me, that was like bottom shelf liquor. But that stuff tasted pretty good. It tasted as good as that, like Macallan's age 12, you know. But that, we weren't here to be talking about booze and stuff like that. But nevertheless, I do remember that with that, when that thing with the 35, that there's kind of like this, you start to remember your childhood again, but you hit 35 and like it was at 20, that's 15 years past not having your dad around and not having that, not to be able to share that experience, and to, or even to know that he probably went through something like that himself, maybe, but you don't know because.
And I have to add my mom to the equation too, because
yes,
you know, she lived until I was 28, but she slept for 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
And she was incapacitated. She had moments of lucidity, but she was mentally incapacitated, and she was over medicated. But again, she's of the it's funny. She comes from the Depression era, the 1930s Depression era, but that group does not talk about depression, you know, clinical health depression. But she suffered from it. She'd lost her life partner. She had a child who really, you know, should have been her grandchild. I mean, there should have been 2 generations between us, right?
Yeah.
Know how to handle Generation X. She wouldn't, you know, she didn't know how to handle baby boomers, let alone Generation X. So, you know, it was challenging for her. But I got to say this about my mom: the greatest gift, possibly the greatest gift I ever received in my life, came from my mom, and that gift was emancipation of guilt. And what happened? So, you know, my dad dies when I'm 20. 22, I graduate from school. I graduate on Saturday. On Sunday, I go back to Longview. On Monday, we're heading to Seattle for my mom's second open heart surgery. You know, my parents married 22 years, both had open heart surgery before I was born, 1965, 1967. You know, they ran on artificial hearts for a long time, but destined to fail, right? So we go up, my mom has her second surgery, and she really never came back from that. We're talking about a woman who, you know, was you talked about your roots from Sweden. My mom too was a very robust Swedish woman, you know. You know, think Helga, you know, from Hagar the Horse. I mean, and she, you know, stout 200 pounds, 5'7", 200 pounds. After surgery, she was 100 pounds and a skeleton.
Yeah.
But the greatest gift she ever gave me, like I said, was emancipation of guilt. So I stayed with her. So I had a job right out of college at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I was a public relations job, 6-month gig. I was able to do that job and go home on the weekends and be with her. And then when the job ended in October, I went home for good. I went back to Longview for good, and to stay with her and make sure things were fine and make sure she was getting on her feet. And she was doing okay, you know. I mean, but she went from being vital to being elderly overnight. And so, you know, but despite that
happened to my mom when she had COVID.
We went to lunch one day. Says to me, David, she says, we didn't spend all that money at Linfield putting you through college to have you come home and take care of me. Find a job, you know, follow your chosen profession right when you find work, you know, call me, but get out of here. You know, I've got enough money to take care of myself. You go. And So I did, and I was able to have about a 10-year journalism career. But then when she passed, it was time for me to come home and take over the business, which I was already managing from afar. I had managers in place, still do, but she allowed me to go and pursue that career. And
because if you would have stayed home, it never would have happened.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You talk about, part of the thing you wanted to talk about tonight was like, how things were different and how we were impacted by our parents and, by different generations and at different time periods in this, history of the world. And, in that regard, those were definitely, Depression era values, the silent generation imparted to me solidly Generation X. And I'm grateful for those values.
Yeah. Because I like thinking, I don't, because my relationship with money is different, though. But I'm pretty good with saving it, though, because when I did.
Do you remember the 9 Inch Nails song, Head Like a Hole? I'm hearing that in the background, right? God, money, I'll do anything for you. God, money, I'll do anything you want me to,
Well, I know that I had the highest paying job I ever had in my life was bartending in a casino.
Sure. Oh yeah, good tips.
And it was, and I learned that job when I was 50 years old. Not when I'm young, and so of course I had a boss who said, Bill, you can't do that because you're not a multitasker. You can't multitask. So I was like, saying, F you, I'm going to do what I want to do. And that wasn't, and so I did, but, she was kind of right about that because it was really rough. The job was really hard. But, but I had that experience and, I was like as a day shift bartender, I was making $1,000 a week, that's
what year?
Which is not too long ago. It was before COVID.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, it was before COVID.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The COVID changed everything, as you know.
No question.
But yeah.
No question. I mean,
yeah, that's gonna take a good decade or more for all of that to shake out.
Yeah, I mean,
if not, it probably like a whole generation. And then
one of the great tragedies of COVID, and now I say this as somebody who was, I got the vaccine as soon as I could. I've been vaccinated 4 times. I don't get the vaccine anymore because I just don't worry about it. I've never been one to go to the doctor. I try to avoid doctors at all cost. And because, I remember when skepticism of the medical field, when holistic medicine, things like chiropractors and things like, whole food, plant-based diets, vegetarians, those were liberals. Those were weird liberal people who were on those plant-based diets and went and saw chiropractors.
And that's all starting to change.
And now, and people who were skeptical of medicine were the liberals. And then along comes COVID, and suddenly the liberals are like, we got to get that vaccine. And it's the conservatives are like, well, wait, not so fast. We're skeptical. And I'm not here to criticize either group. What I am here to say is, I think it is an absolute tragedy that we can't be more forgiving to those who chose different options than ourselves. themselves. If you're an anti-vaxxer, you make fun of people who were soft, wore the mask, the diaper rag, the face diaper. And if you're a liberal, you say, risking everyone's life, being socially irresponsible, when really, I mean, people were just doing what they thought was best for themselves. And
yes,
I think but
in that sense, we were tested. All of this stuff was theoretical because see, the last pandemic that came through was when the year that we were born, and that was the Hong Kong flu.
Right.
My mother had it, and she talked about this, and it was like for her worst headache that she ever had, except when she had COVID. And that COVID put her in the hospital for, she was in intensive care for a bit, like a week. And which she went in being one way. When she came out, came out with like a bit of like COVID dementia, something like that. So it was coming from being able to, so that's like, I started essentially being my mother's caregiver after she came out of the hospital.
Gotcha.
And then and so she's been hospitalized twice for COVID, and each time it was a huge mental hit. So it was like, but it was more like, okay, because everybody gets it differently, and so I think that we get it the cardiovascular. So like one of the times that I had it, which was this like silent COVID, it put aneurysms in my eyes, and so I've had like dealing with like damage on my retina due to COVID, but anyways, but if we look at the last pandemic that came through, what was that?
And did you get the vaccines?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But
I haven't, I only had COVID bad once, and it was the first time. And that it was, and I was, being in, that was mom was in the hospital. And that's also when I found out that my great grandmother was a fortune teller. And that's, so my journey with tarot began with COVID. And so it was like this, there was like something that I had wanted to do, but, church kinds of thoughts and things like that always were speaking to me. And then after that, it was like, well, screw it. I want to do this. So I don't really care what church has to say, and so being how yeah,
terms. Mm-hmm.
Like with the boss who says, oh, you're not a multitasker, you can't be a bartender, and it's like, screw you, I'm gonna do it. And I did it. And or I go back to my guidance counselor in high school who says, Bill, you're just not smart enough. College just isn't for you. You're, and so forth. And then, then it was like, well, screw you. And so I did, so I managed to do those things because that was kind of the drive that I have within me, and to drive through those things. And
again, so that's another characteristic of Gen X, right? I mean,
yeah.
Do what you tell me. I won't do what you tell me. I won't do what you tell me. Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah.
Tell me I can't. Oh, I will. I'll show you.
Yeah. I'll show you. Yeah. I'll show you. Yeah. And that's kind of how that is. And yeah, but like earlier, some of the ones you were talking about earlier when you were running for office for the first time, and you talked about those old timey Republicans, but that was during the time also that there was the political scene was less divisive, and it was less like, okay, you get down off the debate stage and you shake your hand to your opponent, and maybe you go up, maybe in a couple weeks from now, after your ego or whatever has like unpacked, and you go back to having dinner with these people at the local restaurant or something else, and you're back into being in a community together, And, because there was a time that was what this was just a different idea, and you allow a person to have a different ideas, because I remember that as well from the 80s and in the 90s, that there was that rapport between the political factions, and then people got pretty heated in their debates and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you share a meal with a person, then that person still is way more human to you, which is like, if we think of now in our current environment, and with social media and everything else, there is no incentive there. You don't know this person, so you can be as mean and nasty to the person as you possibly want to be, or even if that is not who you are.
You become emboldened with every keystroke.
Yes, exactly. And so here we are. We're in a country that's almost seems like it's divided into two different countries, and between the different factions. But there's more than two factions, because there's more like 3 or 4 or more, because if there's probably like 7 or 8 different factions, but the only ones that are given voice are the ones that get the most amount of clicks.
Sure. So, we'd spoken earlier, and you had mentioned how I used to use my Facebook page to push a fairly progressive agenda. Certainly my page was used to discuss social issues, and when I first got into Facebook, that's sort of what I thought it was all about. This is my opportunity to be the editor of my own paper. This is the opportunity for me to have an activist page, right? And I did that, and to this day, I can tell you, I have only blocked 2 people or unfriended 2 people, and that's because it got really weird. And my page got weird as it was, but I always allowed people, no matter how far right or how far left, speak on the page, because somebody else would come at them and argue. I frequently didn't argue with people. I had I allowed other people to go at it themselves. Now, I also had a young man, the child of a high school classmate, tell me, "Dave, your page is so toxic." So this is like a millennial kid, right? Telling me, and I thought about it for a while, and it didn't really impact me immediately, but I still remember that comment. And as time has gone on, and I've gotten older, I'm less ego driven. And what I've come to realize is that, Bill, there is nothing I can say to you that is going to make you change your mind. If you have, you're grown up, you're a grown ass man, you've got your own ways. There's nothing I'm going to say to you that's going to change your mind, unless
you have there's a willingness to change,
willingness to learn, willingness to consider, and a willingness to change. And so if that happens, maybe I can influence you in a certain direction. But absent that, there's nothing I can do. And to suggest otherwise would be completely ego driven. And that's one of the things I think in the last 5 to 10 years, I have tried to get away from operating under the influence of my ego, right? And to with some successes and probably more failures, right? But there again, I believe that's what what Christians call humanity and human frailty. And I think when, we talk about human frailty, the biggest source of frailty is the ego.
And that's the thing, that when we get older and we become if we're lucky enough to get old and you start to lose your memory, you also lose your bit of your ego. And so we come into this world, so, you know, not a lot of people, not because some people, I think even Jimmy Carter was losing a lot of it, you know, a lot of his mind before the end, but you know, very few people are sharp.
End of his office.
His life.
Right. Yeah, he was sharp as a
not the end. Yeah, he was pretty sharp. So people have, there's all these different things going on, you know, because everybody starts to get something between the age of 50 and 60, and the and you know, like what, 33% of the American population is pre-diabetic by the time they hit 40, you know, and so you know, and so I got that from both sides of the family. I don't think it matters. I think that's just the way that the human body is. It can only handle so much sugar and so much processed foods or whatever, and then before it starts to break. And you know,
sure.
But what was I going to say? I was saying something here. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you know, we were talking about COVID.
Oh, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about, we enter into this life with no memory of what came before, and we leave this life almost, if we're lucky enough to live that long, the same state. And so if I were to just take a little side trip away, we would be looking at, so when it came to my religious spiritual views, the details of what those beliefs are, to me, seem like completely like they didn't matter, based upon when my grandmother was passing away when I was like in 93, and it was like, when it was like towards the end, it was like, well, to her it seemed like the only thing that was important was family and friends and those who you love. And so when you have like all these different factions of religion that are fighting each other over whose idea is more dominant, and then it's like, well, maybe it's not about that at all. Maybe that's that whole ego-driven thing. It's the whole ego-driven aspect of religion, and that's what needs to be destroyed. And then if you look at in our political system, it's that ego sense of identity, and that's the thing that needs to be destroyed. And then what comes out of that rises out of that, you know, the phoenix that rises out of that is like, maybe it's something brand new, and maybe in our current state something brand new is going to arise out of this that may be more hopeful. And though we didn't really want to go there, but that's also something to go there, you know, and because you look at where things were, and now here's the way they are, and sort of in a transitory thing. And of course, we're also shifting zodiac ages. We've gone from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, and because there was that song in the 60s about the age of Aquarius, and the age of Aquarius is here, but it's not completely here. And I think that the historians have said that that in these cycles, when they occur, that there are a lot of big major changes that happen society-wise. At least that for those who follow that, it's not really talking about astrology, because, you know,
explained like this, and I can't really quote you the theory because I'm not familiar enough. However, it's just every 80 years of the United States, we have had a major battle, a major war that shifts society for the next 80. And so
it's the turning. It goes.
let's
it's
say
a 40-year,
yeah,
a 40, yeah.
if we talk about, if we were to go to war suddenly with Iran and shift back 80 years to 25 minus 80, let's see, that'd be 45. Oh, by golly, that's World War II. 45 to the 1860s, Civil War. 1860, 1780, we're just coming out of the revolution.
The Revolutionary War, yeah. I don't remember the guy's name, but it was the turnings, and we're into the fourth turning now, and and so generally the theory being is it goes from a progressive era, and then 40 years of progressive, then it shifts to 40 years of regressive, and then it goes into another. Then there's a big turmoil, and then it goes to another 40 years of progressive, and then 40 years of regressive. And so the regressive era, then leading right up to the Great Depression and the Second World War, was the Gilded Age.
Right. Sure.
And then your other progressive era, which was kind of in there, that was leading up to the Civil War, was the Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. That occurred in that time, and there was different types of progressive. And so then the theory being is that we are at this inflection point again, which could go to another progressive era. Most likely, that's probably what will happen, because people they get confronted with the mirror, and the mirror of whatever is going on. You have you have the Epstein things, you have all of this terrible stuff that's been going around, and you see that, and then most everybody sits in the middle someplace. I mean, in the middle of the spectrum, and because when it comes to elections, it's always the people like me that you have to convince, the independents, the ones who aren't either politically affiliated, or if they are, it's for whatever reasons, but you have to convince me and people like me to how you want us to, how do you want, what the direction, but so it's then when it's the middle people, when they get fed up, that's when these other things happen, because for 20 years we've been asleep as a people, and
well, so yeah, there's a lot of theory in what we're talking about right now, right?
Yes.
And theories are subject to review, subject to change. It's all hypothetical, right?
Yes.
We need to use the scientific method to prove or disprove, the hypotheses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we cannot disprove the hypotheses, then perhaps it becomes fact. It strikes me that the last, we've certainly seen major technology advances, in the sense that, I look at Microsoft in the 90s, and Apple,
yeah,
and, the computer, and then the internet age that followed as major advances. Now we're on the brink of AI,
Yeah, and it's the AI, and it's the quantum computer.
Right. Yes. Quantum.
And so what you would have is you have like your visionary of Isaac Asimov, who in 1956 wrote this short story called The Last Question. And it was about, at that time, it was about asking this supercomputer about, can you stop entropy? And then time goes on, next thing you know, and then the whole universe goes dark. But then the computer at that time, it had integrated itself into higher dimensional space. And when the last star burned out, the computer said, "Oh, I got enough data now." And then its response was, "Let there be light." Then a whole brand new universe was born.
Mm-hmm.
But that sense of but his was that of a supercomputer, and now we have those supercomputers are starting to come online now. I think that Oregon State is building one of those quantum computers. I think they have one, but they're kind of a little bit of afraid to put the AI on it because they don't know what's going to happen with. Because the issue being is about alignment and the default mode, and so the default mode is to not put any restrictions on the system and just to see what happens. And so I could just imagine because what could happen if you have let's say if it's just not the quantum computers, but you have your regular computers, and you have more of the AI come online, these more data centers, more this, and then they sell subscription services in order to replace your staff, your cognitive staff, replace your receptionist, replace this and that, and the next thing you know, well, that's easier. Well, we'll just we'll save a little bit of money. And next thing you know, 10% of the workforce has been laid off. And then if you don't, or all of that is laid off because it's much easier. So the default mode is to just let this loose without adding any regulations for what happens when you replace 40% of the jobs in the United States with this computer system. What happens? What happens to the people? What's your plans then? Is that when the society collapses? Is that when the whole nation becomes a failed state? And next thing you know, instead of having this great nation, the nation just collapses like one of those African countries that just collapses under its own weight because you don't have a plan in mind, because you're not really thinking. And so maybe it's this inflection point time is when we need to be thinking like the Iroquois Indians and what they said when they were like when George Washington and Ben Franklin and those founding fathers and Thomas Jefferson were talking to those people before and they were thinking about the Constitution and putting that stuff together, and they had a thriving democracy or a thriving, whatever you might want to call it, a representative democracy of the Iroquois nations, 250, 300 years ago and beyond. But their wisdom was, you got to think about how this decision today is going to affect people 7 generations down the road. Yep. And so we as a people, when we implement this AI, we really need to be thinking about 7 generations down the road and how that is going to affect things. And because the default mode is just to let it loose and see what happens. But then the other side is saying no, we need to have what they call the AI alignment, and we need to align ourselves and figure out how is AI going to fit in with our society, and so do we allow half the jobs to disappear? Do we allow that whole thing? And so we come back to your experience losing your parents when you're very young, losing your dad when you are 20 years old. Well, a lot of these jobs and things, they have junior people and they have intermediate and they have senior people. And if you lose all of the junior people, you lose your knowledge. And you lose a lot of this knowledge. And so you don't have that knowledge to when those senior people, when they retire out, you don't have that knowledge, because I've heard that there's stuff like this has happened because you
lose the top 2/3, right?
You lose the bottom 2/3, and then eventually the top third is gone.
and then you don't have anybody around to fix the machine. So you have like if that Peter Zayan guy, because I kind of tune in, because he talks about this with Russia, and that Russia, all of their nuclear engineers, all of their people who know how to fix the machines are older. They're like the baby boomer generation, and they're starting to age out. And so his thinking is that whole nation, it has only a few more years left before the whole place collapses, because they don't have the knowledge isn't there to fix the machines. And there are like sci-fi shows where it kind of had this thing going on where I think it was even a Star Trek. There was that one with the hollow, the world is hollow and I touch the sky, and they'd been on this generation ship, but they didn't know, and that or whatever, it was one of those where the asteroid deflector was, so anyway, they didn't, the generations that knew how to fix the machines weren't present anymore, and they were there worshiping the technology. And so when things went bad, there was nobody there who could fix it. And so and so we're in a situation where we could be that people who,
we're also in a situation where we have, our birth rate exceeds our death rate, where we are seeing diminishing resources, where climate change is real, where countries are being affected by climate change. I mean, maybe this is, one of those times where, and then maybe a disease does come along that takes away 1 billion people, and devastates society, but allows the earth to regenerate. I don't know. Lost you briefly.
Oh,
now
you lost me. Okay.
Caution you this. Let me put my glasses on here. My battery is dwindling, and
you know what? We'll just if you have the time at a later date, we can come back and talk again.
I would love that.
I don't know that we really answer the question of how things were, but we did talk a little bit about that, and then we had with my fashion, we sort of meandered, but we meandered elsewhere. And I hopefully that for those people who are watching this on the replay, I want you to put this in the comment section if you make it all the way over to here, and then maybe a blue heart and one of those shooting star things. Okay? Because I do know that some people who come in and they'll watch like 5 seconds of it, and then they make a comment, and they're just sort of like doing the algorithm thing, and charging the algorithm thing, and but nevertheless, that's one of the things. And
thank you very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure reconnecting with you, and
yeah,
I hope that we can continue that. And
we can, and if you hang on, we can go backstage, and then this will kick back in, and then we'll unlive, the live will end, but we can talk for just a second more. Absolutely. And we can continue on this conversation at a later date.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you everybody for tuning in for this hour and 8 minutes, and we'll see all y'all the next time.